Hello and welcome to another episode of Radio Entrepreneurs. My name is Alex Cooper and I'm filling in for Jeffrey Davis as host today. On today's episode, we're going to break from tradition a little bit and do a deep dive into design thinking, a topic that I think is increasingly important for industry. If you haven't heard of design thinking before, then you'll definitely want to stick around because this is a methodology or process that can be applied to just about any business that has any interaction at all with human beings. And it can help you improve just about anything that you're doing. Its origins are in software development and user interface in a user experience world, but the techniques have been used for everything from designing better experiences for children's MRIs to helping people clean their kitchen floors. So there's much opportunity for innovation and differentiation in today's world revolves around designing superior customer experiences. Today's show, we're fortunate to have a panel of outstanding guests who've all done work around design thinking. Matt Belch, who's the founder of Vision and Logic. John Carter is the principal at TC Gen. David Roller, who's a user experience designer, has been doing this for over 35 years. And Joe Rampt, who is also a UX designer. So without further ado, I'll get into some of the questions about this. I mean, probably the first question on people's minds is, what is design thinking? And why is it important?
I guess I'll start and we'll turn it over to the panel to give some more color to it. So design thinking in general is a human-centered method. It originated, I'd say, as far back as the 1960s. It doesn't just go with software. It was originated with industrial design and people trying to look at the science of design. But really why should I care if you're in any kind of business? It's because where it starts is with your customer. And it tries to understand the feelings that they have experiencing whatever product or service it is that you provide, and to then fine-tune that service or come up with better ones based on an understanding of their deepest needs and how they actually think and how they actually feel. I might turn this over to some of the others to give some of their color to this.
Absolutely. Does anyone else want to chime in? David looks like he's smiling over there on the other side in Canada, I believe. Is that right?
Well, essentially, it's to say something like customer-centered design can sound like a theory or like a buzzword. And the simple fact is, if the customers aren't involved and consulted in the process, if they aren't thought of in the process, then of creating a product or delivering it, then you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things wrong, and you're going to leave money on the table, frankly. So from a purely practical standpoint, it only makes sense to focus on the people who are actually going to be buying your offer, who are actually going to be experiencing what you have to offer.
Right. I think of it as, I kind of wish the word design wasn't in the term design thinking, because to me it's really just a rapid and repeatable problem finding, idea generation, and sort of product improvement and new product creation process that is really focused on understanding real needs of customers. And I really don't think you can create great products if you don't understand what needs you're trying to meet.
And although my colleagues might disagree with this, I think some credit should be given to Stanford and their so-called D School, who basically took many of these great principles and strung them together in 10 steps that they preach and that they follow. So although the description that my colleagues are providing, I think is actually the heart of the whole process, being user-centric, there are others that have a high degree of formalism, and I think just for sake of fairness, I ought to represent where at least that term has been promulgated.
Actually, I will just chime in a second and say I don't disagree with you. I agree with you, John. Stanford D School was one of the seminal places and is still a very important place for people who want to learn more about design thinking. And to their credit, they take students from a wide range of disciplines, just about every discipline that Stanford has, and allow them to enroll in the D School to participate in it. But it's not the only source. IDEO, guys like Tim Brown and Bill Muybridge, they were writing about design thinking, and it goes back even to people like Buckminster Fuller, and a little more recently than that, people like Christopher Alexander, who wrote the book Pattern Language, and a guy named Horst Riddle, who was at Berkeley in the 1970s, writing about the theory of design. There's a huge pile of contributions. It's if you're interested in academic formalism, there's quite a tradition here, and I think the point for the audience is that it's not just something that a bunch of us made up. It's methods that have some real intellectual rigor behind it. But I think where we're coming from as well is that it can be applied in business applications. All of us, all four of us, have been using these methods very successfully and make a huge difference in the development of products. And so, not so much about the academic formalism, but more about, can this be applied to real world problems?
Well, that brings up the next question that I want to get into is why should businesses care about what design thinking is and how can they use it?
Well, Dave had a good answer to that. I'll build on it and let the others go as well. The basic idea here is that you're trying to understand the core of what your customer feels and needs, and sometimes they have needs that they don't even know that they have. And by using these methods, the methods typically have to do with interviewing people, observing them, watching them, and seeing what they might need that you could provide for them. Very often, there's a famous one, Henry Ford saying, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. The thing is, the inventor will have an idea, but then the inventor needs to go observe people and understand how they actually think and work in order to better provide their service. And this can be used in a wide range of things, anything from medical services to law to software, where we're using it quite a bit. I mean, any of those things involve humans experiencing a service or a product. And in all those cases, there are almost certainly areas that you can improve.
Yeah, I think businesses should care because there's really only two things you can do if you're running a business. You can create a new product or service, or you can improve an existing product or service. And this is the fastest way to do either one. And it starts with developing empathy. So if you look at, there's 5 stages to it. So there's empathy, definition, ideation, prototyping, and testing. So, and these are things that can be done in a day. So empathy, first step is talk to your customers or your users and find out what their experience currently is with your product or with the service you're trying to create. And then from there, that's when you create ideas, and it's a rapid way to come up with ideas that both work and don't work.
Excellent. Now, one thought I was wondering about is, can service companies apply this? A lot of people in our audience are in service industries, lawyers, accountants, other professionals. Can you imagine ways that they might be able to use design thinking?
I'd be happy to answer, but I think the panel has some ideas to contribute here. I'll chime in if others want to. Others don't.
Well, one example is the customer contact center at Toyota. And one of their challenges was providing high quality and efficient service to answer customers' complex problems. This was a totally internal team, as opposed to thinking about ideation outside the company. So the context was Toyota Motors sales customer contact center for Toyota Electric and the Scion brands. And believe it or not, the cross-functional team that was engaged in this particular situation were all internal. They were call center reps, software engineers, business leaders, and change agents in the design process to transform the service center experience for both customers and frontline employees. So there's an example of not only it being interesting because it's pure service, but also because it's purely internal. So that's one example.
Yeah, another example is actually I go to a doctor at One Medical, which is basically a doctor's office that was redesigned. They have a few different locations, but it was redesigned based on interviews with people about visiting their doctor and what they didn't like about it. So if you go to One Medical, the first thing that strikes you is the waiting room. It feels like you could be in a spa. Or you definitely wouldn't guess that you were at a doctor's office, and then even when the doctor walks out, like my doctor comes out in jeans and a polo shirt, like I had to ask her if she was the doctor. So it makes you very comfortable. You don't wait at all.
Yeah.
So they took all the friction out of the doctor's visit, really making patients more comfortable, and people actually visit the doctor more often there because of it.
Hey, Dave, you want to chime in?
I'm sitting here trying to think of an example that adds to what people have already said. But I think the key point I would make is that in general, service businesses are probably in an even better position to benefit from this. Why do I say that? Because you are constantly interacting in a service business. You're constantly having interactions with your customers or failing to have the interactions that they would like to have. And if you have actually gone through the steps that Joe talked about, developing empathy for them, thinking like they think, understanding what they need, and then imagining ideation, imagining the solutions that would work for them. And then you try them out and test them and make sure they work. And repeat the process. One of the key things about this approach is that it is iterative. It doesn't presume that you are going to get everything figured out all at once from the beginning and then just simply make a Gantt chart for how you're going to implement it all. It has to do with trying things in the real world and seeing how it works.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Dave. The fact that the iterative quality of this is that you try something and as quickly as you can, you get it out in front of people. In some cases, it's a prototype or just a test offering. In other cases, it could be the real service. And then you iterate as you learn more and more about it. I was going to go back to when you said law offices. The point I was going to make is I think for many people engaging a lawyer, it's one of the most stressful times in their lives. Mm-hmm. And that's clearly an area where a lot of empathy could be applied. You know, what's it like to go through this legal process with us? What are the things that cause you undue stress? What could we do to remove that stress? And imagine if you built a legal practice along the lines of keeping your clients calm and as stress-free as possible. But the only way you can do that is to understand it from their point of view.
Another service business that's very stressful is financial services. Joe and Matt and I all have worked fairly extensively with financial services. And one of the core understandings, I think, that emerges when you work with financial services is that most customers are not looking for to increase their financial sophistication or this or that or the other thing, or all the things that financial service companies are always trying to do or force on them. You know, basically, essentially, they're looking for confidence. They're looking for confidence that they're making the right decisions, that they're going to do the right thing, that they're going to have a good outcome. They're not going to have regret, that they're, what behavioral economists call loss aversion. The fear that if I make the wrong decision, I'll regret it, so I don't do anything, and I'm paralyzed. I fail to save, I fail to invest, I fail to do the right things. So when you're designing any aspect of a financial service, whether it's online or it's in office or over the phone, you've got to think, am I taking stress out of this relationship, or am I adding stress to it? Am I doing things that are going to improve and enhance people's confidence, or am I doing things that are going to undercut it? I'll stop there, and you guys can add stuff if you want.
Well, I think if you look at, to add to that, so if you look at Capital One right now, they have coffee shops. So they've converted a lot of their banks into coffee shops, right? And that's directly a result of a design thinking process that they went through with IDEO. So they interviewed customers. What don't you like about going to the bank? And most of them had never even been in one because they're younger. Like younger people don't go into a bank. They don't know why you do it, but they like coffee. They like comfortable places to hang out. So that's why Capital One has started to convert the banks into coffee shops as the direct result of design thinking, and it's really helped their business.
And I'd say finally, to address one of the points you brought up, Alex, about service businesses and the fit there, is that the last couple steps are ideation and testing. And typically in service businesses, you don't have to go through a lengthy product development process like you would, say, in manufacturing. And therefore, the points that my colleagues bring up are especially germane in the service business because you can prototype things so quickly by simply changing behavior.
Yep.
Actually, getting back to the Capital One example, I've been curious and watching that for a while. I don't know if anyone has direct experience with that, but I wonder if they have found that to be successful.
Yeah, I don't know if they have, and that's also a big part of design thinking too. Is you have to keep improving. I think that's something businesses don't do. Is they release a product and then they don't improve it. People love new product development or new service development. Incremental improvements are harder to make, but my guess is that they've had to make changes to it, and in order to improve it. I went there once, and then I started asking the bank person about the Capital One credit cards, and they didn't know anything about them. So they knew a lot about coffee.
Well, I think that's a really, really important point, which is obviously design thinking is not all that's involved in having a successful product. And this, in fairness, this is part of the formal process, but you have to think about your go-to-market strategy, and you have to think about, you still have to have good operations. It's not enough just to have had a great concept. And I think that often happens, frankly. Someone will engage in a company, business will engage in the design thinking process. They'll come up with a great idea. They'll maybe even implement it well, and then they'll fail to market it or fail to take the whole supply chain into account. Matt mentioned before Tim Brown at IDEO, who wrote the book Change by Design, which is sort of the seminal book for design thinking TM. And it's a great book, and it's full of great case studies. But one thing I thought was really interesting was the first two successful case studies that he writes about in this book, which came out 7 years ago, have both been taken off the market. And they both were very popular with the people who did buy them, but they didn't take in the marketplace. So I think that's a really instructive lesson, an important thing to remember. I'm going to stop there, but I could keep going.
That's such a great point, Dave. To go back to your Capital One example, I don't know either how well it's succeeding. But what you would want to do if you'd fully embrace the design thinking process is you would have some design thinking people, that is, people who have this kind of skills, go to the Capital One offices, banks, go to the Capital One bank and observe and see what's working and what isn't working. And be continuously looking for new opportunities to be innovative and to add new value, and do so, within your business process, business proposition.
Well, that brings to a nice transition of how would somebody go about introducing design thinking in their business if they're interested in this methodology? What would be the first step? How would you get started?
If you've never done it before, you're probably going to want to reach out and find some folks who have done it. And the people in this panel are all experts in the area. But I'll just say, for example, for whatever reason that's not an option for you, what I would suggest that you do is first start thinking about it, not from the market down, but from the customer up. What I mean by the market down is very often companies take an approach which is, well, we have these different segments or different areas that we think we can address, and we'll plug products into those segments or areas. Instead, put a person behind every one of those segments and imagine, what it's like to be experiencing this from that point of view. And remember that there are going to be different kinds of people. Like with the Capital One example, there's going to be millennials, and there's going to be the retirees, and there's going to be everybody in between. And they're not all going to require this or want the same kind of services. And then walk in their shoes, either by interviewing them or by observing them.
Yeah, all you need to do is find a customer or a prospective customer and ask them, if you're a lawyer, just start off by asking them, tell me about the last time you had to go visit a lawyer. And listen to the story they tell. Why did they go? What was it like? How did they find the lawyer? How long did they have to wait? what was the communication like back and forth? So if you do that with a few customers, you're gonna discover a set of unmet needs that the current process isn't meeting.
Yeah, what Joe just described is often called a journey map, and it's a great way to look at the whole chain of consumption and interaction. I'd also say, though, there are 3 ways you could bring it into your company, Alex. The first is, as Matt said, you could seek out an expert and hire someone to train or consult, typically on a single project to get started. The second is to go to seminars, and there are many good intensive seminars where you can learn, and if you can't get someone to help you, that's second best. And the third way is there are a lot of written resources as well as sources on the web. So if you have to totally do it yourself, you can certainly do that. There's nothing intrinsically difficult about it, but there, in each one of the 5 steps or the 10 steps, however you frame it, there's a lot of intricacy in how you can do it right and do it well. And there's a big difference between answering a closed-ended question and an open-ended question. And so I think your outcome will be a lot better if you've done it with someone who's had that experience.
Yeah, the way I think of it sometimes is, we're a smart bunch of guys, and we could have gone into a lot of other professions. But, I've known Matt for decades, and I think he's a brilliant guy. I know he's a brilliant guy. He could have made a terrific neurosurgeon, but I wouldn't ask Matt to do brain surgery on me. And I think it's the same thing.
To your credit.
I think it's the same thing with this. It's like, not to brag or try to mystify it, but you do learn a lot of stuff when you actually work at it. And I have a very long list. I've made an awful lot of mistakes, but I like to think I've learned from them. And you can benefit from that by working with people who are professionals. And they don't have to be as old as us. They can be they can have even a few years of experience. But just by focusing on it, it makes a big difference. It really does, and it adds a different perspective culturally to what you're doing, and it makes it fun, frankly. If you get the right people involved, they're going to challenge you, but in fun ways, and it's going to make it a lot more interesting than just trying to plug at it without taking into account these techniques.
Right. I think it's also important, if you run a business, for everybody at the business to participate in the process. A big part of design thinking is it's a multidisciplinary process. So the best solutions come when you have maybe a business person, a technologist, maybe a designer. If you're running healthcare, you actually have the nurses and the doctors and the receptionist, everyone working together on the solutions rather than just it coming from one person. It's human-centered on both ends.
Yeah, and it's not just within your organization. It's also whoever is in the whole is in the whole chain. The example in that Tim Brown's book that I was talking about, the first one, is they invented these bicycles for people who are afraid of bicycles. And the problem is their business model was that they were going to have them manufactured. It was the Shimano, the parts manufacturer, that came up with the concept working with Ideation. And the problem was they came with a great product. They tested it with real people. Real people loved it, their target market. They forgot about bike shops. And their business model was they had to sell these bikes through bike shops. And that they had done all their dealing with executives at bike companies. And bike shop personnel hated the whole idea of simple bicycles, and they wouldn't sell them. So, after a few years, they had to pull a plug on the whole thing. If they had thought to bring bike shop people into the project, they might have found the right twist that would have made this practical, or they would have realized they couldn't sell them that way. They had to sell them some other method.
It's a great story, Dave.
Yeah, that actually leads into the next question about what are the risks in using design thinking.
I thought about this question. I don't think there are a huge number of risks. I mean, you have to use the method properly, but if you use the method properly, I think it's actually one that lowers your risk, because what it does is, it, again, involves your customers from the very beginning, so you're getting feedback right away as to whether your ideas are good or not. You're involving as David and Joe and John were talking about, you're involving the entire group of people that are going to provide this product or this service, and so you're hearing their concerns, right from the very beginning. Maybe the risk would be that you strive for perfection and try to wait too long and come out with the perfect product. A better solution is to come up with something that's better than what people have today, and then put it out there and learn from it. But that's the only risk that I can think of, is trying to make it too perfect. Others have thoughts on this?
Sure, I think there too. Matt is largely right, at least in my experience. It normally de-risks things quite a bit, but there are two, let's say, fail areas, Alex, that could be problems for those trying it. The first is on the business side, not involving all the functions like David and Joe have mentioned. If you leave out a critical function, you're likely to get a lopsided solution that won't be the best total solution. And secondarily, Dave talked about the Shimano biking example, and the other error that you can have is you can visit the wrong customers. So I think the two errors that I can think of are not involving the totality of functions involved in creating the product or service, and or not visiting the proper set of customers, where customers use it in the broadest sense. It's not the end buying customer, it's all the people that touch it in the consumption chain.
Right. That's a good point. Something at the D school that they teach the students there is you learn from your extreme users. So the customers who really love what you do, or the ones who really hate you. So you want to go to those two, because that's where you can either learn what's really great about what you're doing and how can you improve it, and where are you really falling down. And I think a lot of people focus in the middle, and they want to move those people from the middle to really loving it. And that's a lot harder to do, because they don't have the passion on either end, and they won't be as involved in the process and trying to help you.
Yeah, that's a great technique. I can add another risk, and maybe this comes from being here in Montreal, but there can be a tendency to fall in love with the appearance of design thinking, and to have huge workshops and living labs, and we're involving the people and the customers and everything else. And but you're not really actually going through the steps. You're not really developing a real understanding. You're not putting enough work into the ideation or the inspiration, and trying to come up with a solid concept. You're just playing. And the converse of that, I don't want to discourage people, because the converse of that is, I think a lot of times business people perceive the whole process as playing, and they dismiss it as airy-fairy, and I'm just going to talk to people, right? It's about the fundamentals or something. Done right, this is an extremely disciplined process that basically figures out how to marry the customer's interests with the business's interest.
That's very good. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on something Joe said, that it's not really a risk, but it's a benefit of design thinking, and that is, in general, they classify needs as in two categories. One are extant or observable needs, and the others are hidden needs that are often called delighters. And so one of the things that design thinking gets at is not what people actually express as their needs, but rather it helps you envision things that they didn't express and are hidden needs, which are delighters. And there's a wonderful thing about that, and this is a fellow named Kano came up with this saying, which is the delighters of today are the must-be's of tomorrow. And you see this in cars all the time, for example, with cup holders. And that's a great example of, you know, a hidden need. Who would have ever thought of cars needing cup holders? But when they appeared, people were delighted. So I just wanted to kind of highlight what Joe had said as being really not a risk. It's actually a strength of getting at those hidden needs.
Great. Are there any examples of like design thinking disasters that would make great YouTube videos that we can talk about?
Design thinking disasters. Wow. I can't.
Well, I participated in a class at the D school, and they give the students a lot of projects to do, and using design thinking. One of them, they were going to have a rap concert on the campus there at Stanford, and it was during the day in the student union. And so the students did all this marketing. They put chalk on the sidewalks. They handed out flyers, and they had interacted with thousands of students. And then they were just convinced. They were convinced they were actually going to have to hire extra security guards because so many people were going to show up. And then when it came time for the concert, no one showed up. So like, I think believing your own hype is a real problem with it. So like those students were being nice, but the concert itself just wasn't designed for when students go to concerts. It wasn't at a place that would have been a fun place for a rap concert. And it was a flawed design from the start. And there was no amount of hype that would have improved it.
Terrific. So if people want to get started in design thinking, how would you recommend people get started? How do they find experts?
Well, boy, it's not an easy question to answer. There are a lot of people that will claim to do it. The first thing to say is that don't just go searching like on Google for design thinking. There are a number of other methodologies that are related. Human-centered design is a big one. You might want to spend a little time educating yourself into what it's about, reading some books. The book I always recommend first to people is The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, which is not so much about design thinking as it is just about understanding how people interact with the world and with objects in the world. And perhaps reading some other materials such as the Tim Brown book. But in the end, if you're looking for an expert, what you're going to want to do is ask them to walk you through some projects that they've actually done using these methods and see that there's a good fit with what you're looking for.
Excellent. I mean, obviously the people in this room or virtually in this room are probably a pretty good place to start.
Yeah.
I want to, thank all of you for participating, getting up really early in the morning. Thanks, John. For that. So to wrap up, we've been speaking with Matt Bilge, who's the user experience designer at Carbon Black and Waltham. John Carter's principal with TC Gen. David Roller, who's been designing user experiences for 35 years, and Joe Ranth with Joe Ranth Design, who's also a user experience designer. This is Alex Cooper with the Radio Entrepreneurs. I want to thank you for joining us today on our special episode on design thinking. Thank you very much.